Welcome, everyone. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. Welcome to another live stream. We have a very special live stream today. In the first half of the program, we have journalist, commentator, geopolitical analyst Pepe Escobar joining us to discuss all things geopolitics, especially the upcoming Brics summit and how it might be affected by all of the intense developments transpiring from the Middle East to Ukraine. Then we have Scott Ritter talking about, at about 11 a.m. Eastern, an important event in New York to stop nuclear war. And we will also go through the military front on all of the developments occurring worldwide. But let us get right started. As you're coming in, do hit the like button, do hit the subscribe button, do hit the notifications bell. Hitting the like button helps boost the stream in the algorithm. And just to remind you, at any point, this channel could be disappeared. We are noticing that this is happening to friends of the program as well as colleagues. So do go to the video description, subscribe on Patreon, subscribe on Substack to support this show, and of course, follow me on Rumble. You can find all those links in the video description. But without further ado, we have Pepe Escobar. Hey, Pepe, it is good to be back with you. How are you?
Hi, Danny. Hi, everybody. 5 p.m. in Moscow. Still a little bit of sunshine, last days of summer. So everybody's in the street enjoying the last because
Yes.
then it's going to be really hardcore.
Yes, the winter is coming. Everyone, before we get started too, you can find Pepe's Twitter and his Telegram in the video description. So be sure to follow there because we'll be referencing a lot of articles that you can find all there. But Pepe, I wanted to get started with of course, the just absolute intense developments occurring in West Asia. We have Israel bombarding Lebanon, killing hundreds upon hundreds of people, children. There's talk of all-out war. Hezbollah is targeting the intelligence headquarters of Mossad. So this is the first
This is the first one.
first Beirut to Tel Aviv trade-off. What I wanted to ask you, though, Pepe, is given this development, given the fact that now we are looking at not just a long war in West Asia, but one that is continuously escalating into this regional war, how does the multipolar world respond? How do you feel and believe that Russia, China, and Brics will be coordinating and responding to what will be a generational conflict in war that now is reaching a 1-year point?
Well, the first straightforward response we all hope will come in 4 weeks. October 22 at the start of the BRICS summit in Kazan. The expectations are extremely high, not only here in Moscow, but in major Eurasian capitals as well. Negotiations are frantic. It's extremely complicated because the BRICS have not only to propose to the whole global south, the global majority, their roadmap for next year, the next few years, geoeconomically, geopolitically, and morally as well. And that will include a very strong stance on a genocide in Gaza ongoing and the possibility of a genocide 2.0, because so far, most of the victims in Lebanon have been civilians. So this is extremely serious. And we cannot count on the UN for that anymore. I just before talking to you and all of you, I was writing a column about the absolute desire that the UN is basically, New York is basically a monolith to incompetence and irrelevance nowadays. Apart from 3 or 4 beautiful, lofty interventions during the General Assembly, Erdogan, Pezeshkian, certainly Lavrov. Lavrov, I think, is going to speak on Saturday, Wang Yi, but that's rhetoric. I'm sorry. And what happened this past weekend in New York was beyond any surrealist script. It was the so-called Summit of the Future. And they adopted, theoretically by consensus, a pact for the future, with only a few abstentions and a few no's. Most important information of them all. Otherwise, we could go on for hours or so. Who voted against? Russia and Iran. Who abstained? China, among the most important ones. Translation: the three most important Brics rejected the UN's pact for the future. So this is something of transcendental importance, and it has to be analyzed, I would say, in the weeks ahead, even before the BRICS summit in Kazan. Because essentially, these three civilizational states, they saw this pact as an anti-BRICS pact, essentially. And obviously, because they diplomatically, they are in close touch all the time, they knew exactly how this thing was organized, how this consensus was built up, who actually redacted this. If you read, go to the UN website and try to read this thing. You're going to have a heart attack, all of you. But it's all there, at least. At least they don't disguise it. And if you read the annexes, it's even worse. So I took the trouble of reading this thing before writing, of course, and it's a nightmare. And guess who wrote it? Big tech and big finance. The so-called redactors of the digitalization process, according to them, were the governments of Germany and Namibia. But this is for show, obviously. The people who actually redacted are the Davos gang, the World Economic Forum. And very few people around the world remember what happened in 2019. An agreement, a direct agreement signed by Guterres and Dr. Ivo Klaus Schwab of a partnership between the UN and the World Economic Forum and Davos. So basically, Davos dictates the agenda for the UN. And what we see now, this pact for the future, you can, all of you, I strongly suggest you read it. It's all there. And at least we had a no and a counterpower from the three top BRICS. I said, no, we don't agree with all that. First of all, because we were never consulted. First of all, we were not part of these negotiations. And worse, African diplomats at the UN, for instance, off the record, because they were all scared, this weekend they were saying, look, we voted for this thing. We didn't read anything. We didn't even know what we were voting for. But we voted out of solidarity. What does that mean? That they were either coerced or bribed to vote for the pact. So this, I think this gives to all of you the real state of things at the UN. No matter those beautiful words that Wang Yi or Lavrov are saying, no, the reality is tawdry, is cheap, is absolutely disgusting, and it's a UN completely irrelevant and under control. And that also explains, on another vector, why they are incapable of really protecting Gaza or protecting Palestine. No, because they know that any resolution at the UN Security Council will be torpedoed by the usual suspects. Not only the US, but UK and France as well. They will torpedo it. So this is reality for all of you. It's ghastly real. And this brings us once again to Kazan in 4 weeks. They'll have to start to try changing the state of affairs. And it's not going to be only through rhetoric. They need a concrete roadmap. So let's see if we have at least the first baby steps, outlined in Kazan. And then we start to have real changes starting 2025. But it's going to be a long and winding road, to say the least.
Yeah. And given this, I mean, I've heard directly from people close to Russia, people close to China. They say that the UN system is just wholly, of course, controlled by the veto, by the top, of course, the so-called top members of the Security Council, aka the United States. So, given this, though, because Russia and China, how they differ is that they truly are against what Israel is doing in Lebanon, for example.
Yes.
How do they then navigate this really what is a geopolitical storm that has such wide-ranging impact? How do they navigate this, not just leading into the BRICS summit, but also right now?
True. And right now, we don't see any specific targeted action against what Israel is doing. That's quite worrying. We have the axis of resistance. We have the militias in Iraq now, getting more involved. Sooner or later, we're going to get the Houthis even more involved. Iran, for the moment, is taking a back seat. Pezeshkian is in an extremely complicated position because he has to manage the let's call them the semi-Atlanticists in Iran who want some sort of accommodation with the collective West. With the Europeans, would be possible. With the US, absolutely forget it. And the Hawks, which basically the absolute majority, not only the IRGC, but the Hawks in general, and the Hawks in the Majlis, the Iranian parliament as well. And at the same time, this new important position of Iran inside the BRICS, where they have to coordinate with the two big powers, essentially, and also with India, because they have excellent bilateral relations, diplomatic relations, and a partnership with India. But it's juggling. So the juggling that Pezeshkian has to do, it's in many ways is similar to the juggling that Putin has to do here as well, with the Hawks, with infiltrated Atlanticists, with westernizers among the oligarchs, with some very powerful oligarchs who are still connected to the West. So to elaborate a strategy unifying, especially these, let's say, these top four BRICS, let's count India as well. The complexity is absolutely mind-boggling. Before I wrote the column that was published in Monday here in Russia on what the BRICS are discussing on the geoeconomic front, the discussions that I had with people, heads of development funds, people in finance tech, guys from the BRICS Business Council who are actually recommending policy for the BRICS before Kazan, they say you have no idea how bloody difficult the whole thing is. Internal problems in all of them, and can you imagine coordinating all of them on the same table? And now adding the new members, and adding also a member that is a new member, but it still does not consider itself a new member, Saudi Arabia, which is absolutely crucial. Very good relations with China and Russia. But with Iran, it's still baby steps to have a solid relationship with Iran. And at least we heard this from Saudi Arabia this past few days, finally, from MBS himself. No relationship with Israel as long as this thing goes on and there is no sovereign Palestinian nation. This is already an enormous step, because it goes completely against the rules-based international order and those lunatics in the White House at the moment. But you see, then it's little by little. It's too slow for all of us who are deep into it and following it on an everyday basis. Of course, we get dejected sometimes, and sometimes many times. We all wish why don't they can come up with a consensus solution? No, it's too difficult. It's too difficult. And the fact that these okay, once again, Talmudic psychopathological genocidals, that's the short definition of those people in Tel Aviv. They are entering into another suicidal operation, which is basically killing civilians in Lebanon. That's what they're doing, essentially. They know that militarily, if they launch the so-called ground offensive against Hezbollah, it's going to be a disaster. Everybody knows that. Even the guys from the IDF know that, and they still keep, they double down. They double down all the time. So they're losing a war in Palestine, and now they're choosing to lose a war in Lebanon as well, but killing civilians indiscriminately. And obviously, what we could say, we could basically define them as a Western criminal syndicate. In fact, US, UK, and European vassals, they legitimize all this all the time. You see the British media rejoicing at Lebanese being killed, literally on their front
Right.
pages.
New York Post with the pager attack, rejoicing.
With New York Post, exactly. So it's for all of us who are involved into this fight to build a multinodal alternative, a multipolar world. It's tough. It's very, very tough. And this past 2 weeks, in fact, there are a lot of people here who are starting to frontally disagree with the Russian position in Ukraine. This is very complicated because these people, for instance, they are looking at those daily attacks by swarms of drones against infrastructure inside the Russian Federation. You cannot read this in Russian media because this is Ministry of Defense censorship. And a lot of well-informed people here, they strongly disagree with this censorship. They go, no, Russian public opinion has to be informed on what's really happening inside there, not even in Donbass, but inside the Russian Federation as a whole. And so the enemy, in fact, monopolizes the narrative. You see it all over the West, the attacks on ammunition depots, that kind of, but you don't see it in Russia itself. So this is counterproductive, and another example of how Russia still does not understand how to weaponize soft power. It's an ongoing discussion.
Please, no, I wanted to ask, if you've heard of the latest developments, because what I'm with regard to interest in Brics, because it sounds like what you're saying is that this is a very slow process toward a multipolar world, of course, and a slow process for it to impact such a thing like Israel's absolute U.S.-backed genocidal rampage that's turning regional. But we have news that Afghanistan is very interested now in joining Brics. The Western media is now very concerned about Pakistan also being interested. We know that the Iranian president and Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, Pezeshkian and Putin, are going to meet at the Brics summit. Talk about how the strengthening of Brics in West Asia could, and we can close on this topic, could change the calculus over time.
Wow, this is immensely important because now we have members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization who want to be part of Brics. And this will be leading, I would say, midterm to a merge. It's something that we already discussed in some of our podcasts that is being widely discussed among these Eurasian capitals. Lukashenko himself already said on the record, of course, they have to merge because the objectives are the same. And it's true. And it's especially because the role of the SCO changed this past few years. Now, it's not only a counter-terror, counter-separatism organization like in the beginning, 2001, but it's a geoeconomic integration organization. They're talking about connectivity corridors, for instance. And Afghanistan is absolutely essential for the whole thing. The Russians and the Chinese especially, but to a certain extent, with some reservations, but looking at the big picture, the Iranians and the Indians, they all want to bring Afghanistan inside the SCO to normalize Taliban Afghanistan. And evidently, the next step would be inside Brics as well. So sooner or later, becoming a member of Brics and the SCO will be practically the same thing for all these big actors in Eurasia. In the case of Turkey, for instance, they are dying to get into Brics, but they are already observers at the SCO. So they could get into both simultaneously, in fact, next year. Okay, no, sorry. Something important came up. So from Central Asia to West Asia, these new candidates for BRICS are a big, 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 big thing. And of course, they are being courted diplomatic by the big guys, of course, because they know how strategic they are. Same thing for the other African candidates. The case of Yemen is very complicated because Yemen, theoretically, Yemen now has two governments. One is in a bloody five-star hotel in Riyadh, which is recognized by the international community, rules-based international order. The real government is one in Sana'a, in fact. And these are the ones who are trying to do something for the benefit of Yemen. So, like a few months ago, they sent two delegations here in Moscow. I met with one of them. It was a fantastic discussion. The problem is they could not be received formally by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and by the Ministry of Agriculture here in Russia because they are not the official government, you see? So you still need to deal with this kind of things. It gets even more complicated. And they were trying to get basically agricultural agreements to Russia to relieve the famine that's still raging in Yemen. Nobody talks about it in the West anymore, but Yemen still, they are still under some sort of a partial siege by the Saudis. They were bombed by US, UK until a few days ago. Now there's a lull. So they are at war on two different fronts still. And they're still suffering because of this blockade, this economic blockade, So, but at least we see from the part of the Russians and the Chinese is very interesting, Danny. Little by little, they're becoming more assertive. It's like it's those little details that you see for the first time in their official declarations that, wow, they never said this before this way, so blunt. For instance, when they earlier this week, they were talking about we support our Arab brothers, especially Palestine. This is enormous in terms of Chinese diplomacy because they are usually very, circumspect. They never affirm something. So in terms of international politics, only Chinese issues. So you see, we can see that it's changing little by little, but it's extremely complex and it's the whole thing is slow, unfortunately.
Yes, indeed. Well, Pepe, let's now talk about Ukraine, because you have the sweaty sweatshirt, as you call him, Volodymyr Zelensky, in the United States, talking about a victory plan, which is simply a rebranded "quote unquote" peace initiative, meant to put pressure, it seems like, on U.S. and Western backers to go along with a so-called strategy that is to defeat Russia. More money, more weapons,
give me more money,
Russia. But there's also a reality on the battlefield, and there's the reality that this conflict appears to be going in Russia's favor, and it's going quite swiftly in Russia's favor as we move into the Brics summit. Do you find that there are going to be implications when it comes to the strengthening of Brics and what Brics will do in October and what is now transpiring in the Ukraine conflict?
The discussions here, then, they are on a different track, in fact. It's something that I heard for the past 2 weeks, practically nonstop. The invisibility of the war in Moscow. And what many businessmen, some oligarchs themselves, heads of very important state companies define as a quasi war. And comes back to the same place. These people who align with the more hardcore factions of the Siloviki, of the intelligence community, including FSB internally and SVR externally, foreign intelligence. Many of them working at these agencies, they are proponents of the swift decapitation strike, which has not happened, and we don't see any prospect of happening anytime soon. Because the official Kremlin tactic and Ministry of Defense tactic is what we see now. Conquering one village a day, maybe 3 or 4 villages a week, advancing very, very slowly, tsunami of artillery, meat grinder, cauldrons, this is the way. They're not going to change. And this is fascinating because it's something that when we spend a lot of time in Russia and we start to understand a little better how the Russian mentality works, when they set out on a pattern, nothing deviates them from the course that they decided to follow. And they don't accept foreign interference or suggestions or whatever that is. This is a cultural. It's very important. It's quite cultural, you see. And in fact, there is we can say there is a sort of isolationist component to the Russian psyche in everyday life, and also applies to military matters as well. And they say, okay, that's it. We thought about it carefully. That's it, and we're not going to deviate from the plan, which is something that is essentially happening with the SMO. But now they have been forced to deviate somewhat from the original plan because now it is a counter-terrorist operation. And now they're saying it out loud. You see it in the major geopolitical shows here. You see it in the major newspapers here. And the military channels are talking about it. And even the government is basically, Medvedev basically saying this is a counter-terrorist operation. It's a CTO. It's not SMO anymore. Counter-terrorist operation, especially because of what happened after Kursk. And Kursk is something that could be solved within the next few weeks or keep on going for another few months. Nobody knows. So there's a lot of blah, blah, blah. We don't hear anything specific from the Ministry of Defense. There are a lot of criticism of how the Ministry of Defense is censoring too much the real facts on the ground. And this is true. But from our point of view of foreigners, we tread a very thin line. We have to be extremely careful, including on what we publish, even if it's in English. And they read us, obviously, especially because we were here. So we have to be extremely careful. And our criticism, even if it's a constructive criticism, may be misinterpreted as foreigners interfering in Russian internal affairs. And then this thing gets extremely dicey, right? But this consensus of, let's try to find a solution for the war within the next few months at best, because we know exactly the collective West game. They want to impose a ceasefire so they can regroup, and they will reattack later. We cannot allow that to happen. And of course, the absolute number one issue, which is you need a different regime in Kiev, period. It's more than obvious. How to accomplish that? The only one who knows, of course, is Putin. Maybe 2 or 3 at the Security Council, but that's it. Nobody else knows. So it's a very volatile context because they have to manage how to deal with the ongoing proxy war, which it almost became a hot war a few days ago, and prepare the Brics summit, which the government as a whole is okay. This has to be an extremely successful Brics summit, not only for us, but for the global majority. And last week, for instance, we were discussing the geoeconomic front. The main decisions on payment, alternative payment systems, all that, they have not been made yet. They know what's going to be on the table or arrive at the table in Brics, but they still don't know how and how they're going to present to the other BRICS leaders, because they, for instance, Xi or Lula or Pezeshkian, they have to read about these things before so they can make decisions during the 2 days of the summit. But at the same time, it's something that I keep learning here, Danny, and all of you. It's the Russian way of doing things. Usually it's a mess, and then at the last minute, they come up with a solution.
What's so interesting about what's going on with regard to Ukraine is you have this, you have the sweaty sweatshirt Zelensky talking about victory, talking about the end of the conflict, as you're discussing that there is an appetite in the collective West to pause the conflict, to regroup, but at the same time, there's also a push, as you noted, that this almost became a hot war because the United States was considering giving Ukraine the ability and permission to do long-range strikes into Russia. That is also going to be talked about again, even though we thought the matter was settled, but it's going to be talked about again during Zelensky's visit to the U.S. and his meeting with Biden. I mean, what do you make of this? And what do you make of also Vladimir Putin's response to all of this? How does Putin and Russia respond to this in the coming weeks and months, given that there's this, it seems like, dual pressure to both take a pause, put a stop to the carnage because Russia is advancing, but at the same time to escalate even further. It seems a bit out of whack in many respects.
It is out of whack because there's no strategy, Danny. These are, last minute tactics, overlapping and conflicting, in fact. Well, whatever happens, the Russians already said what's going to happen. The war will be decided on the battlefield. That's number one. Number two, if you come up with this escalation and there are long-range missile attacks against the Russian Federation, you know what's going to happen. Apparently, the Americans got the message, but not the Brits, because the Brits it's a psychotic thing. It's the British ruling class absolute hatred of everything Russia, and this has been going on even before the Great Game, the original Great Game. And number three, they are not deviating from their plan for ending the war, whatever happens on the other side. So this is reflected on what everybody from Medvedev to Maria Zakharova are saying. This idiot peddling his victory plan in America does not even qualify as a joke. In fact, it does not. First of all, because he's not going to meet Biden. He's going to meet the combo. The combo will be in the earpiece, basically telling Biden what to say to Zelensky. And obviously, they don't want anything that would escalate a war and will once again configure to the global majority as a whole that the collective West is losing this war. This is one of Putin's, it's an enormous discussion here as well. How Putin is not being much more forceful because he pays a lot of attention on how the global South and the global majority understand what Russia is doing in Ukraine against the collective West. So he cannot use any hardcore rash mechanisms, because then he would lose a lot of support in the global South. This is quite open to debate, because if these rash measures would be an answer for an attack inside the Russian Federation, especially with civilian victims, everybody in Somalia or Burkina Faso or in Southeast Asia, they would understand that, of course. But it's trying to get into the minds of the conceptualizers of the SMO. It's quite something. It's a wonderful sport. We could stop our life and only do that 24/7. But at the same time, they have no illusions. They know exactly what is the collective West game plan and the American game plan before the elections, basically the Democrat game plan. They have no illusions of what's going to happen after the elections, whoever they have to deal with. So this is great because they're extremely realist. They are following their roadmap to conclude the SMO. That's it. And nothing will interfere with that. It's fascinating because this is the big picture illustration of what I was trying to tell you guys a few minutes ago. How, the Russian way, how does it work? And this is something that for us foreigners, it's a non-stop learning experience here. You see, the way they accept us here and treat us very, very well does not mean that we have the right to interfere with major decisions that they make, because they won't listen to you. First of all.
Yeah. I mean, those are all great points. And maybe one last thing I wanted to ask you about Ukraine is, there's always talk about Vladimir Putin being very pro-Trump. And then there was a lot of backlash about the comments he made about Kamala Harris being more predictable, just like Biden. So, of course, why wouldn't Russia support Kamala Harris for the next president? But Trump recently made comments about sanctions where he said that the United States would end sanctions on Russia and Iran should he become president. And on the other hand, you mentioned this pressure that the global South feels. Even Iran felt pressured recently to talk and state openly that it was against what Russia is doing militarily in Ukraine. Given that there are these pressures, and given that there's all this rhetoric flying around, what do you believe is the truth about where Putin stands on how the global situation is moving forward as it attempts to resolve what's going on in Ukraine? And it's very clear, Putin has been very clear, the resolution, and the Russian government is very clear that the resolution is meeting the objectives of the SMO. But how will it navigate these kind of global challenges? Because you do have elections. The election season in the U.S. is always a circus. And you also have a lot of pressures on even Global South and Brics members to even rhetorically perhaps hedge in all kinds of different directions.
Well, it will depend to a certain extent on what the BRICS will present to the global majority after the end of the summit. Because this will, don't forget that it's the Russian presidency, and BRICS are following a Russia designed agenda with Russian priorities. Of course, listening to everybody else, but Russia needs to have a very cohesive, coherent, and strong message at the end of the BRICS summit, especially because a few weeks later, we're going to have the G20 in Rio. So the BRICS can already preempt completely all the blah, blah, blah that is going to take place in Rio, and won't lead anywhere, because the G20 nowadays basically split between the collective West and the global South. And top BRICS are members of the G20. So it's going to this G20 is going to be split, and it won't get anywhere essentially. But BRICS is a completely different story. And a strong BRICS showing in Kazan next month, they will arrive in Rio dictating the agenda and not reacting to what the Garden will try to impose on them once again, which is exactly what happened this past weekend in New York, where the Garden was dictating to the BRICS the agenda of this pact for the future. But that was too late. because the BRICS were not involved in the negotiations. Everything was done by the Davos gang. And when they saw the document, we cannot sign this thing. It's absolutely impossible. But it was too late. Can you imagine? Even the president of the General Assembly, the new president, said, "Yeah, we're going to have to renegotiate this thing." But there was not, there was no feasible time. Less than 2 days. It's absolutely impossible. Now it's different because the BRICS are going to set the agenda at the summit, and then they arrive in a position of force at the G20. And obviously, everybody knows that, especially the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians as well. And the Iranians, the fact that they are talking to the Europeans are talking to the Iranians. The Europeans don't want to abandon Iran, and the Europeans want to invest in Iran, like they did before the sanctions, before the JCPOA, before the sanctions, etc. But the Russian position is realistic. Terms of elections, whatever happens, Putin's remarks about Kamala, there was fantastic trolling, especially because the American system doesn't understand irony or sarcasm or metaphors or figures of speech or trolling for that matter. They take everything literally. It's very limited intellectually, so they took it literally. So, obviously the Russians who are masters of metaphors, they loved it. Here it became a joke everywhere. Putin trolling the Democrats and the Democrats buying it. As for what Trump is going to do, it's once again blah blah blah. Nobody really knows. He says one thing, he does another. And don't forget, he's a top Zionist, so he won't do anything that would compromise Israel. Russians also know it because they have to deal with their Zionist lobby here, which is immensely powerful in Russia as well, and includes a lot of very powerful oligarchs as well. So to deal with that here is also, for Putin, is extremely tricky. And even with all these limitations, the Russians at the UN and diplomatically via Lavrov, Ryabkov, etc., they are being more and more forcefully pro-Palestine, just like the Chinese. And then we have everybody, and we have Erdogan was, in fact, one of his best performances was in New York. Everything that he said about the genocide, that was straight to the point. That was not Erdogan hedging anything. This is you could feel it. This is what he feels about it, at least, which is very rare because he always has this pasha veal, and you never know what he's up to. But on Palestine, that was the real deal. So these are the auspicious aspects because the top BRICS converge on the key issue: genocide in Palestine, support for Palestinian sovereignty. So they are aligned with the lens of Islam as a whole. So immediately they have 2 billion followers. Just like that. So this is enormous. How they're going to transfer this goodwill into practical decisions, well, that's it starts now, right? It starts next month in Kazan.
Right, and perhaps we could speak about Kazan more now from the framework of a topic you have written extensively about and recently about, which is this question of BRICS constructing an alternative payment system and financial infrastructure, and the centrality of things like blockchain currency, like the new development bank based in Shanghai. So we have Russia and China, of course, spearheading a lot of this. Could you talk about some of the details that you have uncovered recently about what will be discussed and how an alternative payment system, an alternative financial system will be in the works during this summit and, of course, future BRICS deliberations and efforts?
Yeah, I strongly suggest to all of you, please try to read this column. I try to make it as concisely as palatable as possible, using Russian analysts. And the second part of the column, it's Professor Michael Hudson speaking. I sent an email to Michael, said, Michael, this is what the Russians are saying. This is what's on the table. Please tell me what you think should happen. And his suggestions are fantastic. But it's going to be very complicated because they don't exactly align with what they are discussing here. But most important things will be on the table, and we still don't know how they're going to present it to the other BRICS, and we still don't know the conclusions and how they're going to present this to the rest of the world. A system called BRICS Bridge, which is inspired on the M Bridge system, which is ongoing. He has among them the People's Bank of China, Hong Kong, Thailand, Emirates, Saudi Arabia. There to a few months ago, 2 months ago or so. For instance, it's an example that I always mention because it's quite graphic. The Thais buy oil from the Emirates, and they pay through Mbridge. This means they don't need currency. They are not afflicted by currency volatility. It's always the same unit via the BRICS bridge. And this, they could expand this to not only the BRICS, but the BRICS candidates as well. Everybody would be trading via the BRICS bridge. Based on the M bridge, which forget about currency volatility. Number one, excellent. How they are developing this, the guys from the BRICS Business Council say it's not even redacted yet, the final document. That's one thing. Another thing is a system called BRICS Pay. BRICS Pay is going to be, I'm sure many of you know Alipay. Well, BRICS Pay is the same thing. And it will evade SWIFT because it will be intra-BRICS and linked to future BRICS members as well. Another thing is the unit. The unit, well, the first time, the first column on the unit, we did it a few months ago. I was following this process for almost 1 year. I had a lot of meetings with these guys. They briefed me in detail. And then, okay, let's try to present this to the world. It was picked up in the US everywhere. The Wall Street Journal picked it up. They're trying to contact the guys from the unit to know, what is this all about? So the Americans immediately noticed that this thing is powerful. It's a system based on 40% gold, 60% currencies of the BRICS countries, an alternative payment system. They still don't. In fact, talking to the Russian Ministry of Finance, which has to talk to the other ministers of finance of BRICS, they still, it's not finalized yet. But all these things are on the table. And they may converge to the table in BRICS. And they, in all these solutions and new mechanisms can be introduced at the same time. There's more. For instance, a new insurance setup apart from the Western insurance system. Very, very important. A new BRICS rating agency that does not depend on the Westerners rating everybody and rating the global South all the time. Very, very important. So when you put this all together, the dossier is mind-boggling, in fact. So there will be some very important meetings next week and the week after next involving the Russian Central Bank, Minister of Finance. They're going to have to talk to the other ones with the Chinese as well. So we assume that within 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to have more or less the final decisions and the final documents, which will then go, the Sherpas will have to present to the leaders. And then to be approved in 4 weeks from now. So the deadlines are, wow, we are at the last stretch. So it's people are working 48 hours a day on all these dossiers, But you can see that there are alternatives. Absolutely. And what Professor Michael Hudson suggested is slightly different. When you read the column, you're going to see And it's already circulating here, right? So one of the guys told me, look, everybody now is reading what Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson. Can you imagine Michael Jackson? It's just a thriller.
He's back.
Okay,
Yes.
he's back. What Michael Hudson suggested, and they may incorporate some of these ideas. And it's something that we discussed here. Why don't you bring Michael Jackson? Why don't you bring Michael Hudson as an advisor to all of you guys? Which is something that may happen in the near future as well.
That's very interesting. Given all that you said, it's a huge outline.
Yes.
There's a lot of components to this, but it is now there are far more details than we have had in the past, and I did share the column in the chat. Due to censorship, I'm not bringing up the Sputnik title, but I will say that you can find it on Sputnik, find it on
it's
Pepe.
already being published in the US, Danny. Today I saw it's on UM's review. It's probably the top story, and it's on Zero Hedge as well. So it's already circulating in the US, which is it's a very good thing.
Great. So everyone, make sure you follow Pepe's Telegram so you can read the column. But I wanted to ask you lastly, Pepe, on this question. What are the most significant challenges? You have, of course, Russia and China being the mega kind of powers with the financial and political capacity to really spearhead this. What are the biggest challenges that you're hearing in terms of getting this off the ground? Because there still are a lot of doubters on the ability for the multipolar world to truly create an alternative to the US dollar. We know that it's still far away, but it seems like the pace of de-dollarization has accelerated very dramatically, even in just the last few years. What are the biggest challenges from here, given this new architecture that you outlined?
Well, the internal Brics problems they have to solve. When Lavrov told us earlier this year that we need to accommodate the new members, first of all, that's why that was diplomatic language to say frictions among the new BRICS members or between the new and the old, etc. We have to solve this before even start thinking about expansion. And now expansion is not only the 34 nations that Putin outlined a few weeks ago. Now it's getting to 40. And after the BRICS summit, it's going to get to 50, 60. So everybody will want to join BRICS. There's no question about that. So can you imagine managing this expansion and at the same time managing the different dossiers, especially geoeconomic, that have to satisfy all old and new members at the same time? Wow. It's something that has not been attempted since the end of the Second World War, 1945. But there, at the time, the Americans didn't have to satisfy anybody. They satisfied themselves and they built a system for themselves, right? Now it's different. Now you have a group of nations trying to build a system that will satisfy most of the planet. It's a much more complicated thing. So when for instance, this title, which is very provocative, I borrowed from Michael, in fact, the idea that we need a BRICS Bretton Woods. It's not going to be now. It's not going to be in Kazan. It's going to be maybe a few years from now. It will happen. But what was being discussed, maybe 2 years ago, we need BRICS Bretton Woods 3. No, this is going to be this will be the post Bretton Woods, in fact. And of course, it freaks out the ruling class in the US and the Atlanticists, of course, because then you're going to have two systems. Basically, the world will be divided in two. The global South, global majority will follow post Bretton Woods, and the US and the vassals will be still subjected to the rules of Bretton Woods. But this is not. It's not now. It's not going to be next month. It's going to be before the end of this decade, probably.
Yeah, and I know I said lastly, but maybe there's you mentioned and I wanted to pull up the article so people can find it on Un's
Thank you. Great.
review. I'll put it in the chat after this. But I wanted to ask you, Pepe, about India in particular,
Yes.
because I have my frustrations with India's back and forth, and it's, where it falls geopolitically in many respects, as well as I respect its position, of course, on Russia. But when it comes to de-dollarization, when it comes to this new financial system, how do you see India? Because the West has all these dreams for India. They believe India will be a great buffer against China. They believe India is now, which I think is a wild dream, is the new competitor against China. But yet Brics is really led by Russia and China, and India has all this potential to be a huge player if it isn't already one in all of these talks. Where do you see India's role really beyond the smokescreen that we hear from the West?
Exactly. Um, well, I had some very good conversations with Indian scholars at the Vladivostok Forum early this month. Excellent. They were telling me about some of the problems, of course, internal problems, Modi government, how the Indian ruling class is starting to understand finally that the Quad is a trap for them. You saw the Quad Squad meeting, no? Who's next, with the zombie saying who's next, and Modi was sitting right beside him, and then the mic was on, and everybody said it was off, and he gave away the game, saying that this is basically a containment of China mechanism. So the Indians are starting to wise up to what's really going on. And at the same time, because they have a very good relationship with both um, Russia and Iran, they know that, for instance, when the international north-south transportation corridor will be in full flight for Indian businesses, this is going to be fantastic. It will open uh, commercial possibilities for them all across Eurasia, in fact. And how the port of Chabahar in southern Iran, Indian investment, and they built the road from Chabahar to the Afghan border. When this thing is up and running full flight, the same thing. It's the Indian connection to Afghanistan and Central Asia as a whole. Another immense commercial opportunity for India. So they are focalizing on these connectivity corridors, which for them is absolutely essential towards greater Eurasia. Uh, and they see that this has nothing to do what the Americans are proposing, which basically is essentially nothing. You're going to be an annex of our containment of China strategy. This is what the Americans are offering to the Indians, so they're starting to get the picture, but it's a long process. And they told me about very complex internal problems, Indian politics, internal problems as well. I'm very curious because this, talking about India, I did a podcast to Sputnik India earlier this week. I'm very curious to see the reaction. It's getting good numbers on the Twitter X, but I have to read the reactions of Indians themselves. And of course, I want to go there. I haven't been there in a while, and there's no other way, Danny, right? Just like you went to Xinjiang to see the real Xinjiang. Same thing. India have to travel across India, which is sometimes can be a very complicated experience, but then you learn a lot.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that would be wonderful over the next decade or so is if India can truly integrate into BRICS, in that
Yes.
spirit of BRICS in terms of infrastructure, so that travel can be easier because it is quite difficult. It is
It
not
is
like
very
it's not like
complicated.
going to Russia and China, which have far more advanced rail
Infrastructure,
networks,
and they
which
don't have the
makes it
infrastructure
easy.
inside India. It's like only a few
Yeah.
regions. Exactly.
Yeah, only a
That's
few regions. It's hard to see things. It's hard to get around. But I think those are all good points, Pepe, about India. Is that there is so much pressure to turn India into
a
this
lot.
anti-China node, we could call it. But at the same time, the overall trend of geopolitics is that doing that is political and geopolitical and economic suicide, just like India recognized with Russia. So it'll be interesting to see if Brics will be able to, um, will be able to unite further with that understanding in mind. Pepe, it was really good to be with you today. Any final thoughts before I let you go?
No, let's be auspicious, all of you. Um, Everything is focused on what's going to happen in Kazan next month. So this next month is all about, okay, what's going to happen at the BRICS Forum. So this is the big thing. And of course, meanwhile, how far this psychopathologicals will go in Lebanon. So I expect Hezbollah to start teaching them a few lessons. They haven't yet because Hezbollah is very incremental. They are not in a rush to do anything. It's death by 1,000 cuts. For the moment, we have seen maybe 1 or 2 cuts. When we get to 50, 60, 100, then let's see how the psychopathologicals will react.
Well, thanks again, Pepe, for coming on. Be sure to check out his
Thanks,
Telegram and
everybody.
his X in the video description. Hopefully, we can talk again during the whole Brics madness. So
You
take care.
bet.
Take care.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, now we can get right to it. We have backstage our next guest, and that is a former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer and UN weapons inspector, Scott Ritter. Scott, good to be with you in the daytime. Usually we are palling around in the late evening. Good to see you.
Oh, it's good to be here.
Good to be back with you, Scott. So how about we just get right started first before we get to the big event that's happening on Sunday, the 28th. I want to talk to you about Lebanon, Israel, what's going on there. Of course, we haven't spoken since the horrific pager and device attack. But now we've seen things escalate even further, hundreds upon hundreds. I mean, the count will likely be over 1,000 very soon, given Israel's constant bombardment of Lebanon. But also you have Hezbollah moving further and further in terms of their strikes into Israel with the first strike on the Mossad intelligence headquarters. And Hezbollah is noting this as the first kind of Beirut to Tel Aviv response. So what is your take and reaction to what Israel is doing here? Because it seems like these months that we've been talking about proliferation of a regional conflict appear to be building up toward exactly that.
Well, I think what's clear here is neither Israel nor Hezbollah want a regional conflict. This is what Israel is doing is, again, horrific for the civilians that are being killed. It's the largest bombing that they've done, but it's very measured and somewhat restrained. They are bombing certain targets and they're avoiding other targets, targets that would, compel Hezbollah to escalate further. Notice that when Hezbollah did fire on Tel Aviv with a rocket the first time, it was just one, and it got shot down by an Arrow 3. So it didn't hit the Mossad headquarters. They claim it was aimed at the Mossad headquarters. We don't know, but it was a demonstration of capability, an escalation, but limited escalation, sort of a warning shot to Israel. And we see Israel sending back back channel signals that they want to negotiate it into, this current phase, because it was never intended to become a regional war, and they don't want it to become a regional war. It was always meant to be a pressure valve for domestic political pressures being put on Netanyahu. Even the triggering of the decision to use the pagers, to weaponize the pagers. You don't spend, according to, I think the New York Times or somebody who reported 15 years, doing everything it takes to create the capacity to manufacture these devices, to gain the confidence of the consumer market. Remember, you're coming into a market that's already saturated. You have to gain the confidence, and in the process, convince Hezbollah procurement agents that you're a trustworthy source. So that's a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of resources to create a potential. And the potential is to inject chaos and uncertainty amongst Hezbollah at a critical time. Now, the ideal place to do this would have been right as Israel is attacking, or right before. I mean, I'm talking about an hour before. You want the pager still going off as the bombs are falling. You want there to be no gap between, Operation blow up the pager to Operation we're pushing Hezbollah north of the Litani River. That didn't happen. Pagers went off, got headlines, a couple of days, and then Israel begins a limited operation, no ground incursion, nothing, just air assaults. This tells you this is all about politics. This is about Netanyahu doing things to achieve a domestic political objective, which is his continued political survival. And so we have to couch everything in those terms. Israel's not trying to defeat Hezbollah right now. Netanyahu's saying all the right things, made his little videotape message and all this kind of stuff. But, first of all, he knows that he can't attain his number one objective, which is to get 60,000 people returned to their homes in northern Israel. How do you do that? Well, you got to defeat Hezbollah. He's not going to defeat Hezbollah. This isn't a defeat Hezbollah campaign. This is save my skin in Israel campaign, to create the impression that I'm doing something, to get the pressure off of me for not doing anything, especially about ceasefire and returning of the hostages. The pager thing garnered a lot of headlines, a lot of support. It'll be forgotten. I mean, in terms of its impact on the conflict, it's already forgotten. There's a couple people saying, "Oh my God, that was here," but more people died in the bombings than died in the pager attack, by a huge number, order of magnitude. So I think people are already, from the military and shocked, they're over the pager attack. It's done. It's finished. The new thing now is the barcodes that Israel's flooded with leaflets that get people to turn it on. Then they suck your phone out and then they target you. But again, think of what the Israelis just did there. You got to forgive my voice. I just came off a podcast prior to this, speaking straight for an hour. So I'll slow it down and calm down my voice. Think again, the barcode operation. In order to do that, you have to have a barcode that creates connectivity to an Israeli intelligence collection platform. The barcode has to be linked to hacking tools that are very sensitive hacking tools. Anybody who's been involved in cyber warfare or things of that nature, just look. Do you remember Vault 7, the WikiLeaks thing of the CIA hacking tools, and how, excuse my language, pissed off the United States became when Vault 7 tools were put out there,
Right.
because these are unique tools. These are tools that nobody's supposed to know about. They're supposed to give us an advantage in this cyber warfare hacking world. They were leaked. The Israeli tools here are very sensitive, developed for a specific thing. And what they're doing is flooding the market with QR codes. I can guarantee you that the Iranians the Russians, everybody has gotten this barcode, and they brought their NSA guys in, and they let this thing play out. And they have reverse engineered the hacking tools. And now Israel, this is a one-time deal. All that skill set that Israel brought to bear on this problem is gone. Gone. For what? For what? Politics. I mean, Israel is thrown away, now 3 intelligence operations: the pagers, the walkie-talkies, and now the barcodes that were years in the making. A lot of time and effort were put into it, and these were designed to achieve a certain result. And for cheap political, purposes, these very expensive intelligence-driven resources are being lost. It just shows the desperation of Benjamin Netanyahu right now. Hezbollah, everybody, all the headlines: Israel bombs Lebanon, Israel bombs Lebanon, Israel bombs Lebanon. Guys, you're missing something here. Hezbollah keeps sending rockets into Israel, and the Iron Dome isn't shooting them down. They're pounding the crap out of places that haven't been pounded before, causing thousands of more Israelis to flee. So Netanyahu's political objective of returning the 60,000 has become a political nightmare, because it's now going to become returning the 80,000 or returning the 100,000, which he's not going to do until there's a ceasefire in Gaza, which is a decision he's trying to avoid. I think what he's doing with Lebanon is creating the potential of a crisis, the consequences of which far exceed the consequences of him agreeing to a ceasefire, so that he can make some sort of domestic political exchange saying, I'm avoiding this conflict based upon posturing of strength, and in return, we have to swallow this poison pill. He's trying to get that sort of calculus in place, because right now, as things stands, if he accepts a ceasefire in Gaza, he's finished politically. Even if he gets the hostages back, he's not going to survive once the Israeli population starts looking at October 7th and his response to that. It's tough to recover from that, unless he can create some other issue that because of the scope and scale of the consequences of allowing this to spin out of control, it offsets the political damage done through the. That's his calculation. I don't think he succeeds. I think no matter what, he will be compelled to accept a ceasefire, and his government will collapse, and that's the end of Netanyahu. But he's going to drag this thing out as long as possible, and that's what's going on in southern Lebanon. This is all about Benjamin Netanyahu. It's not about anything else.
Well, it's interesting, Scott, as we have even Israeli media reports talking about exactly what you're saying, and I'm curious about your thoughts about this publication, Israel Hayom. They published from Israeli Reserves General Gershon Cohen, who said that not only is Israel operating with no strategy against Hezbollah, but that Hezbollah is undefeated here and has the potential to drain Israel essentially into the abyss. And what we're seeing, he says, is that those exact 2 objectives that were plainly stated by Netanyahu and the Israeli regime, which was to return the settlers and to deter Hezbollah, have not occurred, but nothing that Israel is doing is going to make that occur. So there was so much, I feel like, immediate reaction and emotional response from people watching this, thinking, well, wow, Israel really just did a major blow to Hezbollah and to the axis of resistance. What do you have to say to that? Because it seems like even Israeli media is saying, no, that's not the case at all.
Let's go back to the predicate here. First of all, Hezbollah is undefeated when it comes to Israel. Israel hasn't beaten them. Hezbollah has beaten Israel. Hezbollah drove Israel out of southern Lebanon. And Hezbollah fought the Israelis to a standstill in 2006, compelling Israel to back away from the political objectives that they had set. And since then, Hezbollah has had a relative parity of deterrence, meaning that there's been back and forth, but Israel has never again dared to undertake the kind of massive operation that it did in 2006, because Hezbollah has been preparing a retaliation that exceeds its response in 2006. So, for basically 18 years, Hezbollah has been preparing for this very eventuality. There's nothing about the Israeli military capabilities that Hezbollah is unfamiliar with. They're not stupid. They know what an F-35 can do. They know what ordnance the F-35 can drop. They know what the F-16 drops. They know, Israel's targeting processes. They know what sensors Israel uses to collect information. And for 18 years, Hezbollah has been building a defensive system designed to not only survive but function against everything Israel has. So we're all sitting here watching bombs blow up in Lebanon. Go, oh man, Israel's knocking the crap out of Hezbollah. Hezbollah's been preparing for this forever. That doesn't mean that they didn't collapse a bunker here, that they didn't strike a building with people here. It's war. People are going to die. Israel will get in a couple shots. There's no doubt about that. But it's also, we talk about Hezbollah's capabilities, and they're impressive. But anybody who thinks, well, Hezbollah can do this at will. Well, Israel has defenses. They're not perfect, but they have defenses. Hezbollah shot a rocket against Tel Aviv, an advanced rocket, not a hypersonic rocket, but an advanced rocket. And it got shot down by the Arrow 3. Why? Because Israel's been preparing for this too. Both sides have been preparing for this conflict. But the notion that Hezbollah is going to be defeated by Israel in a week is just stupid. Hezbollah's been preparing for this for 18 years. Hamas, everybody's amazed by the Hamas tunnel network. Well, who does tunnels better than Hamas? Hezbollah. First of all, the terrain is more conducive to it. I mean, they are deep underground. They are protected by rocks. You're dropping bombs on mountainsides, on hillsides. You might get a little shake here and there, but you're not doing anything. And Hezbollah has everything underground, and there's redundancy. Hezbollah's not dumb enough to say we're going to put all our eggs in this one basket, because when that basket goes boom, you got no more eggs. They've spread it out so that they can take losses here, losses there, but they can back it up here and continue the fight. And Hezbollah is prepared to take this fight as far as they want. But there's a hesitancy here because Hezbollah is the Lebanese government. That's another thing people tend to forget. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization and a political party too. One that's participated in democratic processes in Lebanon and done quite well. One that plays a significant role in the Lebanese government and has done well by Lebanon, meaning that it hasn't been selfish only about Hezbollah. They've done the right thing for Lebanon, for the Lebanese people. And Nasrallah, when he speaks about his duty and responsibilities, not just to the Shia, the southern Lebanese Shia who make up the majority of Hezbollah, but to Lebanon as a whole. He understands his responsibility. So he's not going to do anything precipitous that's going to cause the people of Lebanon to get hammered. And the way he's behaved here, look, you have Christians, Sunni Muslims, Druze, all saying, rival Shia parties, all saying they're with Hezbollah in this fight. The Lebanese government, the army is with Hezbollah because they recognize that Nasrallah has done nothing wrong here, that he's done everything right, that he's managed this escalation. He's not been irresponsible. It's Israel's gross overreaction, which is what Hezbollah is banking on, because it's the same thing with Hamas carrying out October 7th, gambling. This is a good gamble, by the way, that Israel is going to overreact and then generate cause and effect relationships that are detrimental almost exclusively to Israel. Hezbollah is doing the same thing. One of the great weaknesses that Hezbollah had is that in pursuing the potential conflict with Israel, Israel would be able to use that conflict to drive a wedge between Hezbollah and the Lebanese people. The Lebanese in August 2006, they weren't happy about being indiscriminately targeted by Israel, and many of them blamed Hezbollah for this. And Hezbollah took that lesson to heart and said, in the future, we can't have a situation where we don't consider the people of Lebanon, that we act based upon our unilateral wants and desires against Israel, and the consequences be damned. No. Every bomb that Israel drops on Lebanon right now that kills Lebanese civilians further alienates the people of Lebanon from Israel and unites them with Hezbollah. And this is I think this is a consequence that the Israeli government didn't foresee.
And then lastly on this topic, Scott, what do you have to say about the reports during this bombardment of Lebanon that Hezbollah asked Iran to attack Israel, or to maybe facilitate its response, its retaliation to Israel. And Iran is reportedly, and again, these are all Israeli and U.S. officials saying this, so we take it with a grain of salt, but supposedly Iran told Hezbollah the timing isn't right. Now, I want to ask you this in the context of those who constantly, whether it's comments, questions I get, say, wow, Iran, Hezbollah, the ISIS resistance are looking weaker here. They're looking like they are not in the driver's seat, but actually being repelled back and potentially defeated. I've had some people close to me lament about this. Scott, what do you have to say about this in the context of these reports?
First of all, I strongly doubt that. Again, let's just go back to basics. First of all, Hezbollah doesn't operate in a vacuum. So Iran and Hezbollah have coordinated this scenario for, again, 18 years. Hezbollah's defenses, which are designed to absorb far more punishment than Israel is delivering, were designed, with the Iranians assisting, knowledgeable of, advising on. And these are defenses that are linked to political objectives. Again, to buy into this notion, you'd have to accept two things. One, that Nasrallah had given up on Lebanon, which he's not going to do. Because to say, oh, we need Iran to attack now implies general war and all that entails. And two, that Hezbollah had given up on Hamas, because an all-out war involving Iran and Israel creates a whole different problem set that the world is incapable of chewing gum and walking at the same time. Right now, the world's chewing on the gum of Hamas, and it's tough. They're having trouble doing that. But for the first time in a long time, people are talking about the creation of a Palestinian state. There's movement in that direction. Israel's lost the moral authority around the world. These are things realities that didn't exist on October 6th that exist today, that are to the strategic detriment of Israel. And it's all because of the resistance of Hamas. But you get a general war with Iran and Hezbollah and regional disruption of energy security. And suddenly people have high prices, collapsed economies, and nobody's going to give a damn about Hamas anymore, or Gaza, or the Palestinians. They have bigger issues. And Iran and Hezbollah know this. They didn't do all what they've done to get Israel in this bad position just to throw it all away by saying, screw it, let's have the big war. So I don't believe that Hezbollah reached out to Iran. First of all, they wouldn't need to reach out to Iran, because Iran and Hezbollah have coordinated this. It's like, I don't know. I was going to use an analogy nobody will understand, so I won't use it. But it worked for me. But I was like, that's a good one, but nobody will get it. But the point is, they've already coordinated all this. There's no need for Hezbollah to call an audible at this stage. There's nothing that's happened that's unexpected. It's all anticipated. So that's absurd. I think this was inserted to generate the kind of discussions that you're seeing. Because Israel knows that it's lost the PR campaign so far, and so what they need to do is create some sort of information warfare based pressure on Hezbollah. But again, Hezbollah is not amateurs at this. I guess they were hoping to get the Lebanese people to lose faith and confidence in Hezbollah, to create discussions amongst them about the consequences of a broader war. But again, as I said, I've been to Iran, and I was deeply impressed with the intelligence of the Iranian people. I haven't been to Lebanon. I landed in Beirut airport once, but that was a different story altogether. Didn't want to be there, plane diverted. And I was an active duty Marine Corps officer in an airport controlled by Hezbollah. And I'm like, no, I don't want this. Fortunately, I stayed on the plane. They left me alone and we got out of there. But that was a different story. But they wanted to create, I think by doing this, they're trying to indirectly create pressure amongst the Lebanese population and the Arab population as a whole that questions, Hezbollah's status. They're trying to undermine that. Hezbollah is going to ride this thing out. As I said, and as you noted, they haven't stopped the Hezbollah shelling of northern Israel. It's expanded. They're striking Haifa. They can expand it to Tel Aviv if that's the game that Israel wants to play. And you see the Israelis already starting to panic and looking for an off-ramp off of this because, they didn't achieve what they thought they were going to achieve with Hezbollah. The Iranians are very mature. Hezbollah is very mature. The Iranians know what they want. I heard Pepe Escobar at the end of this conversation talk about Brics. Iran is a Brics member, and Iran is singularly focused on what's going to be happening there. That's where strategic victory is codified against the rules-based international order. They're not going to throw it away by panicking and jumping in and attacking Israel. There's no reason to do that. Again, all the tweets that are out there, all the stuff that's about questioning Hezbollah, let's talk in a week. They'll be done because there'll be a different political reality.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I even viewed the bombing campaign. A lot of people, I think we've witnessed this throughout the genocide in Gaza, that the effect that it has, especially on Western public opinion, American public opinion, is for those who are sympathetic, which is a good number of people, to the Palestinian causes. People are destroyed by, they're hurt by it. They're sad. They feel dejected by it. And I think, Israel plays it up as, well, look at us. We are actually doing so well here. We are able to show all of this force. But when I heard about the bombing campaign in Lebanon directly after the pager attack, I thought, wow, this really does feel like Israel is exposing that it's backed into a corner and that it really doesn't have any other options to achieve its objectives. And this won't do it either. I even with all these leaders that have been killed from Hezbollah, that is not how Hezbollah operates either. They don't rely on just a single this guy or this guy to run their operations. They've been building up, as you said, Scott, to this for so many years, decades and decades. So now I think we can, though, move to Ukraine. And I wanted to ask you, there's this visit, Zelensky, to the United States, where he's going to push this, or where he, by the time some people see this, has already pushed this so-called victory plan. Not much, the U.S. has already said, not much is going to come out of this meeting, not in terms of a change of the guard. But I wanted to ask you, given all of this, what is actually happening on the battlefield? Because we hear about Vuhledar being encircled and about to fall to Russia. We've been hearing about Russia's advances for many months. What's actually happening on the battlefield, and how does it translate into what seems to be desperation coming from the Ukraine side, but also the U.S. side and the NATO side seem like they're walking on a tightrope of contradictions?
Well, I mean, the battlefield is going the way the battlefield has been going now for well over a year, ever since the Ukrainian counteroffensive in 2023 was defeated. Russia has gone on the offensive, taking the fight, and Russia has been, maintaining consistent pressure along the entire line of contact. Ukraine has, shown great skill in taking limited resources and moving them around to blunt attacks. Normally, this would succeed, but what happens is, you plug in your best brigade here, the Russians stop attacking, and then they put pressure over here and near this critical town, this critical juncture. And next thing you know, the Ukrainians have to pull this brigade out and plug it in over here, and the Russians stop attacking. They're not going to bust their head against a brick wall, and then they put pressure down here. But it's not just trade one for one. It's you put it in and you've got 5 other places that the Russians are putting pressure on, but you only got the one brigade. And so you got to plug this in. And you can't stop the relentless Russian advance. And it is relentless, and it is advancing. And eventually that brigade that you were using, a fire brigade, is destroyed. Now you got to find another one. pull out another unit, plug it in, maybe pull it out of a quieter position, put in a poorly trained territorial brigade that's going to be chewed up in 3 days instead of, the standard 10. Now you need to put in another one, but you don't have it. That thins out the line. The Russians continue to advance. This is what's happening. This is, the position we're in. And eventually this is going to lead to a collapse of Ukraine's ability to maintain a cohesive defense along the totality of the line of contact. And then you can get a Russian breakthrough, and the Ukrainians will have no choice but to withdraw to the other side of the Dnieper River or face envelopment and destruction. This is what's happening. It's standard attritional warfare, where the outcome is predictable because, military math, allows for certain assumptions to be made based upon the correlation of forces, and those assumptions are being played out on the battlefield. The Russians can't be stopped. They can be stopped locally, but only because the Russians refuse to engage in, fruitless assaults or assaults that are deemed to be too high in human cost. Ukrainians are suffering horrific casualties. Give you an example in Kursk, where the Russians have had to make some adaptations and fight against very well trained, well equipped troops. Using troops that are at least initially inferior in numbers. So you have a smaller number of Russians attacking a larger number of Ukrainians. The casualty ratio is 6-1. So for every Ukrainian killed or wounded, for every 6 Ukrainians killed or wounded, there's 1 Russian. The Russians are saying that the Ukrainians have lost 16,000 guys so far. Well, that means that the Russians have lost almost 3,000 guys. That's a lot. But that's in Kursk, where you don't have the dug-in people. It's a little bit more fluid, the fighting. People are trying to talk. The Ukrainians keep talking about the Russians losing massive amounts of men here, massive amounts of men there. The guys I talk to, the Russians are suffering casualties, but they're talking about 10-1 in some parts of the front, 20-1 casualty ratios. 5-1 in intense fighting, but the Russians, again, as I said, when they get to that point where it becomes really intense, they stop because 5-1 is not the odds they want. I have to tell you, as a Marine, we'd have killed for 5-1 odds, against a dug-in enemy. Probably we're going to get 1-5, meaning that for every one of them we got, they're going to take 5 of us because it's hard to do that attack. But the Russians, they flip the script. The Russians aren't in the business of losing massive numbers of men. And they've also perfected the art of war, and they know what they're doing. The drone superiority that Russia has in terms of the totality. I'm not talking about Ukraine's limited ability to flood certain sectors with first-person FPV suicide drones. That blunts a lot of attacks. It's tough to have swarm of drones coming at you. It's a nightmare, I would imagine. I haven't had that. I've never experienced that, but I imagine it's a nightmare. But but the Russians have Overwatch. They got the deep strike drones. They got the jamming drones. They got the logistics drones. But the bottom line is the Russian assault units attacking are in communication with a controller who's watching them from there. And so they see the Ukrainian troops move. They're able to position them in. And many of these attacks take place without Russia suffering a single killed. And yet they're taking out hundreds of Ukrainians. This is something you're not going to get in the press, but talk to the combat reporters on the front lines. And there are many battles in some of these areas where the Russians are not taking any dead at all because of the absolute superiority that they bring to bear on the battlefield. It's slow work. It's not dramatic. And that's why they're not taking casualties, because they're willing to take the time necessary to get the correlation of forces, to get the artillery in, to get the drone support in, to maneuver troops around slowly, to get in a position where you kill all the Ukrainians, capture them or wound them, and you minimize your risk. That's what the Russians are doing. That's why it's a slow pace of advance, but it's a sustainable pace of advance. It uses up a hell of a lot of artillery, but in terms of eating up manpower, Russia's not chewing through its manpower like the Ukrainians are.
Yes, indeed. What would it mean, Scott, if Vuhledar were to fall? Pokrovsk, we've been hearing a lot about. What would that mean for Russia?
Well, Vuhledar, I think that's in Zaporizhia, and that's sort of been hinging, sort of the key to the battle there. I to be honest, I haven't looked at the Ukrainian defenses past Uladar. I know that it's considered to be a fortified, urban environment that the Ukrainians put a lot of time and effort. The Russians have been bashing their head against that wall for a long time, but they figured it out by attacking the flanks. Again, this is the danger of not having enough troops. The Ukrainians put some of their best troops into Uladar, and they were defending very well. But what happened is, as you start to thin out, you can't protect the flanks. So what the Russians did is started attacking the flanks of Uladar, outflanking, cutting off road, supply routes, etc. And now Uladar is in a indefensible position. They've run out of ammunition, etc. And now they can attack the city itself without, fears of taking prohibitive casualties. What happens when it falls? First of all, will be a huge psychological blow to the Ukrainians because Uladar has been treated like a hero city. I mean, the Russians really have gotten bloody noses repeatedly trying to attack and take this town. Some of their best units have been thrown into that battle and not able to achieve that result. Looks like they're about to achieve that result. What happens when they fall back? It depends what the Ukrainians can do. But I can tell you this: whatever the Ukrainians prepare after Uladar will never be Uladar. Uladar was, a well fortified, well defended urban area, and the Ukrainians won't be able to replicate that. And it's the same thing with Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk has more strategic value, I believe. I think once Pokrovsk falls, that's sort of the key logistical hub. And if that falls, there's the lines of communication now are compromised. It'll be very difficult for the Ukrainians to support logistically the lines the way they are. The other thing, too, is I think Pokrovsk is the last town or city in the hilly area that's located to the in that area. Once you get past that, it's flat ground and very difficult to defend from the Ukrainian standpoint. And I think, again, they have depletion of forces. They've burned a lot of people out trying to hold on to these defensible positions. But when they fall, there's indefensible positions over here, and they don't have the forces necessary, and it just leads to the oversensitive collapse. So once these Kupiansk, fall, other towns, there's villages, all of which have been heavily fortified, part of the Ukrainian defensive position since 2014, 2016. When they fall, there's literally nothing behind them in terms of cohesive defensive positions that the forces can fall back in on. And this is going to lead to a rout. When they leave these heavily defended areas, they move in, they can't be supplied, they're going to run out of ammunition, they're not going to be rotated, they're going to get exhausted, and the Russians will just continue to push, and you're going to see, at this point in time, collapse, retreat, exploitation, and a dramatic change in the battlefield. I mean, the battlefield's changed pretty dramatically if you look at it, but again, slow, measured assault. But when the Ukrainians finally collapse and panic retreat, you'll see, steadier advance. That's what's going on in the battlefield.
Yeah, and perhaps final comment on this: the political kind of fallout of all of this. You have Russia calling Ukraine Zelensky delusional because his claim is that this conflict can be resolved without negotiations with Russia at all. Even Zelensky is lecturing the UN General Assembly, saying if you support negotiations with Russia, then you support invading the world, or something incredibly foolish like this. But at the same time, while Russia is making these advances, it does appear that the United States and NATO, while on the one hand they say they want some kind of resolution to the conflict, on the other, there's just constant escalations. And even during this trip, there's going to be, of course, more money and weapons, even if it is limited, thrown at Ukraine. How do you see the United States and NATO extending this conflict further, given that what you just stated about the battlefield, it has not been changing and will not change for the foreseeable future?
There's a lot of self-delusion going on, even in the Pentagon, which I believe is starting to get a better picture of what's going on. How do I say this? If you take a look at the U.S. intelligence community today and look at the number of, and you always hear when you read about the problem of servicing security clearances, and the Department of Homeland Security has hired thousands of new intelligence analysts. And all this flooded. The director of national intelligence has hired 1,000 intelligence analysts, and each one of them requires to have the highest SCI clearances, and they need investigated. The reason why I'm bringing this up is that we've got all these analysts out there, and the intelligence they produce is crap. Why? Because they're not trained and they don't know anything. And when you have, if I have 15 analysts on a job and I've just hired them, they can't do the kind of detail. I mean, like you see in Hollywood, where the Jack Ryan character is there going, well, when I was analyzing nuclear weapons at the same time that I was doing my PhD in economics, and I was doing this, that, and the other thing. The solution is the third guy to the left. Well, that's genius, Jack. Well, it's because he knows everything, because he's an analyst who's done everything. When I came in the Marine Corps, we didn't have thousands. We had a couple. That's it. It's a handful. And we were expected to know everything. So we spent all our time learning everything, studying everything. It was just the way it was. But when you were an analyst, the product you produced was pretty damn good, because you were good, and the people you relied upon were good. They had your back. They were skilled analysts with a deep understanding of a multitude of problem sets. And we also were supported by an institution that respected knowledge. We called the Soviet Union the evil empire back then, but the foreign area officers and both in the State Department, the foreign service officers and the foreign area officers in the military, they were genuine experts. When I sat down with a FSO from the State Department about Russia, the person spoke the language fluently, did multiple tours there, enjoyed it, respected the Russians. Still, it's the evil empire. It's the enemy. It's the adversary. We're trying to get, but there was none of this, Russophobia and the ignorance that's derived thereof. Genuine experts. The same thing with the foreign area officers. These are military career officers who were handpicked, sent to get a higher education, get an advanced degree in Russian area studies, advanced language training, and then they would get the implementation tours that go out there and do their job. And this was during the Cold War. So when you're doing your job, it's for real. It's not a fake game. It's not play. It's real. You're going up against the real Soviet enemy in the real world, doing the spy versus spy thing. But every one of them, they sat down, spoke Russian, knew the culture, knew the language, appreciated, genuine experts. And when you asked them something, they could give you an answer and say, this is it. That's why a major who was a foreign area officer was the advisor for 4-star generals, 3-star generals, because he would call them in and say, you're not a major, you're the Soviet guy. How are they thinking? What are they thinking? How are they doing this? True expertise. Today, we have all these people who are experts of nothing. I mean, just a little war story. Why not? Imagery analysis. When I was doing the Soviet thing as an inspector, we had some issues come up about missiles, and I had questions. Would the intelligence that I collected, how to read it, what to make sense of what I collected. So I went to the agency, and they bounced me around, and I ended up with a photographic interpreter who looked at Plesetsk. It's a place where they do missile launches, because the intelligence, I was being told, indicated there might be some testing taking place. And this guy, he was well known to everybody. His name, I mean, every time he went to a conference, that was his name. And he was the guru for the Office of Imagery Analysis for the Soviet target. And sat down. This guy was an encyclopedia, knew everything. Why? Because he spent his entire career looking at this one place or looking at a couple places. That's it. And he knew everything. He knew every mouse hole, every family of mice, the rabbits, and because he watched. I'm joking about that, but I'm just saying that that's the kind of detail he had. And then the Cold War ended, and they purged all these guys. Cost effectiveness. we can't have an analyst sitting in the same chair for 20 years doing the same job. We have to diversify. We need, to have a balance in this. So they purged out all the old people and they brought in these new guys, all the junior analysts. And they'd go there, do the imagery thing. But then 6 months later, they got chopped to another office because you got to have, a broad experience. They get chopped 6 months later. And so they had basic familiarity with a lot of things, expertise and none. When I was a weapons inspector, the CIA would come up and brief us on the U-2 imagery that was taken. This is early on before I said, screw you guys, we're developing our own imagery analysis because you guys are dumber than dirt. And the thing that set me off is I had just come back from Iraq on an inspection where I went to one facility, a former missile production facility, and there had been a flood. A river rose, washed away the wall, collapsed the building. And now the Iraqis are in the process of repairing it. So they had sandbags out there, they had cranes, they were doing all this stuff. We inspected it because that building was of note. We said, where'd the machinery go that was in here? We were accounting for it, I come back and now here up come the CIA imagery analysts and they come in and we're going to brief you on the latest U-2 mission. I said, great. And they put a photograph up of this site. They say, this is really suspicious here. We have suspicious crane activity, suspicious vehicular activity. We think the Iraqis are up to something here. I said, well, did you guys read our inspection report? Oh, no. We're not cleared for that. We simply are looking at the picture. I said, well, I just came from that site. That suspicious crane activity is putting, corrugated roofing on top of a building the flood washed away. You did look at the weather reports, right? There was a flood there. Oh, no, we weren't aware of that. They didn't know anything. They were given a picture, told to look at the picture and tell me what the picture meant, but they didn't know anything. That's the reality of intelligence analysts today. They know nothing. So now we come back to what we're talking about. Who's advising the decision makers today about Russia? We don't have any Russian experts. We have people we call Russian experts. We don't have any Russian analysts. We have people we call Russian analysts, but they're not. They don't have the detailed understanding. They don't have an appreciation. They are locked in on a very narrow focus, and they have come up through a system that didn't encourage intellectual expansion and absorption of culture, but rather said you must be cookie cut, we're going to cookie cut you out here, put you in bake. Everybody's the same. Russophobic training. You're supposed to distrust the Russians. Don't believe anything the Russians tell you. Don't believe anything the Russians say. And the end result is you get crap advice. And that's what's happening today when it comes to advising the decision makers about all things dealing with Russia. We don't have experts anymore. Jack Matlock was the former ambassador to the Soviet Union, a genuine, honest-to-God expert on Russia. He's still alive today, one of the best minds out there. Compare and contrast him with Michael McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Russia during Obama, a horrible individual who literally knows nothing about Russia. His Russian sucks so bad, and I have trouble saying this because my Russian's even worse, but I don't pretend to be what I'm not. I don't pretend to be a Russian linguist. I can fake it in front of 25,000 Chechens for a little bit, but I can't do it forever. He pretends that he's this greatest thing since sliced bread, and he got the damn red button wrong. Instead of, reset, it meant overcharged. Wow, talk about getting it wrong big time. You hit that, you overcharge, the system blows up. The guy doesn't know anything yet. He was advising Obama. He was advising, the administration on Russian issues, and he doesn't know. He knows how to disrupt Russia. He knows how to hate Russia, but he doesn't know anything about Russia. And that, I will say, is for everybody involved in Russia today. Not a single one of them could stand up to the former Stephen Cohen and engage in an intellectual conversation about Russia. Hell, they couldn't even stand up to me, a simple Marine. I'd wipe the floor with them because they don't know Russia and they don't want to know Russia. That's the other thing. A key aspect of a good analyst is intellectual curiosity. Always asking the question, why, what, where, how, who, wanting to learn more. You're never satisfied with the answer because it always raises more questions. But why? Dig. Not these people. Russia's bad. Boom, end of story. Don't dig any deeper.
Yeah, no, I mean, and look where it's gotten us. It's gotten us to this point where not even the same. It wasn't the current CIA director who warned back in 2008 that this policy toward Russia was going. William Burns was going to lead us to a huge conflict with Russia. He is now saying that negotiations are completely off the table. I mean, it's even someone who knows better is going along with this policy.
Well, there's a difference, though. This is why I don't respect him. But what does he say? How much of what he's saying is for public consumption, meaning that he has a job to do to pursue a policy objective that has to be premised upon, certain assumptions made about Russia that are being sold to the American people. Remember, he's not there when the director. This is just a pro hint to everybody out there. When the director of CIA is speaking publicly, he's not doing it to inform you. He's doing it to deceive you. All right, so when William Burns is saying something, it's because he's being told. Because normally a director of the CIA doesn't get heard from. Why? He's the director of the CIA. His job is to advise the president, not advise the public. So when you have William Burns, who knows better because he was an ambassador to Russia, he wrote a very salient and prescient assessment, a cable back in February of 2008. The net means net cable. So he's one of the rare exceptions to people who I say they don't know anything about Russia. He does, but he's the director of the CIA now. He's part of an administration that's trying to achieve certain results. I think what he says publicly is because he's told to say this. This is part of a strategy driven by the State Department to shape the minds of the American public and the international public to achieve its information warfare. And I would bet you a dime to a dollar that what he says publicly is far different than what he says privately.
Probably. So. Yeah. Well, Scott, lastly, before we head out, of course, we need to talk about something I've heard you speak about on other programs, how close we came to nuclear confrontation. Of course, we're talking about the permission that Zelensky, Ukraine, has been begging, seeking, really just prying for from the United States to around long-range missile strikes into Russia. Of course, this is not going to stop. This conversation continues to be brought up, and there are reports that the State Department and the Pentagon are in disagreements. The Pentagon, we've heard Lloyd Austin say publicly that he is not in agreement with giving these capabilities for maybe reasons different than ours. The State Department is all in 150% with Kiev's own trajectory. Now, I want to ask you this in the context of this event that you're holding on September 29th or organizing. I'll pull it up.
28th.
Part of organizing. The 28th, sorry.
Don't go September 29th. No one will be there.
Yes, do not come on the 28th. I will pull up the exact information as you're speaking, Scott. But talk about this because Putin did say directly this would be a confrontation, a NATO confrontation with Russia. Russia would engage with NATO directly, which has huge implications that I'd like you to discuss.
Well, the first thing is we start with the notion that, again, because of this ignorance about Russia and all things Russia, because our policy is more directed by Russophobia than actual knowledge of Russia, one of the operating premise that guides everything here is that Russia is bluffing, that Russia is not serious, Russia's not going to do this, that they're just rattling the saber, etc. Again, I would just say that these people are as ignorant as the day is long about this. You've interviewed Ray McGovern, right?
Yes.
All right. You have respect for Ray?
I do. We need to have him back on, actually.
Ray's a good guy. Ray's a former CIA analyst, used to brief the President of the United States. That's how good of an analyst he was. He briefed the presidential daily briefing. Only the top guys get to do that. Taught me a lot of things about how to approach Russian analysis, etc. But Ray, back when I was talking about how in December of 2021, how sanctions were going to backfire. Ray was focused on one thing. He was focused on Ukraine and NATO missiles. And he said, Scott, this is a big deal. And I looked at it and I went, why? Because I'm stupid. But and Ray's smart. I was like, no, I'm worried about sanctions and economic sanctions. He's like, no, this missile thing's going to be really big. It's going to come back and bite. And I said, well, tell me more. What are you talking about? He said, well, the Russians made a big deal out of not wanting NATO missiles on Ukrainian soil. I said, okay, I get it, but why? He said, because, look, draw the map. I looked at it, and just imagine for a second how big Ukraine is. It's a big country. And imagine instead of being painted NATO blue, you painted it Soviet red. And look at now its western frontier. That used to be where NATO had to start from to attack Russia. So all that territory that's on the other side of Ukraine, starting Rostov-on-Don, going into the interior of Voronezh, you get in deeper and deeper. It was hard for NATO to strike that. And so Russia put a lot of facilities in there, logistics facilities, nuclear command and control facilities, etc., over here, because that was the Russian rear, difficult to strike. Now suddenly Ukraine is NATO blue, and you move missile systems into Ukraine, and all those things that were deep in the rear are now reachable. And the Russians are like, we don't want this. This is some of our most sensitive stuff. We can't have NATO missiles able to strike this stuff quickly. Red line. And Biden originally agreed. He said, yes, we'll make sure that's part of any discussion we have. But then when Blinken sat down with Lavrov and his counterparts to talk about, bringing these concerns, he said, no, that's not, we never agreed to that. Ukraine will always have the potential of being armed the way that it wants to be armed, including these weapons. The Russians are like, no. That literally, no, that's not going to happen. And I don't think the West ever believed the Russians. And so now it's happened. We have Storm Shadows in. We have Scalp missiles, which is the French equivalent of Storm Shadow. We have ATACMS. The Germans were talking about sending Taurus, and the Americans still talking about sending a joint standoff munition. These are systems that can reach inside and hit Russia in places Russia doesn't want to be hit. And it creates the potential for a conventional preemptive attack, an attack that allows Russia to be decapitated, leading to additional preemptive attacks. Now, preemption is a word I want everybody to be focused on, because this is what it's all about. This is why Russia's not bluffing. We're talking about literal existential issues here. If you preempt, the whole concept of preemption is to prevent the other side from doing that which it is planning on doing. So a key aspect of preemption is that it works both ways. So if you say, well, we're going to build a capability to preempt Russians' reaction, the Russians are saying they're building the capability to preempt us. We need to build a capability to preempt them. So now you have mutual preemption, which means everything's on a hair trigger alert. In conventional, okay, so boom, 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 the world's not over. But now we get to nuclear. Now, how do we get from conventional to nuclear? It's interesting. If you remember, again, back in the fall of 2022, we discussed this, where the NATO went to Russia and said, if you do this, we will respond with all of this capability. We're going to come in and hit you with, it's all conventional. But if you use a nuke against Ukraine, we're going to do it. And the Russians were like, well, we ain't going to use a nuke against you, but thank you for telling us what you're going to do to us. We take it seriously. So now we have a situation where Russia is saying, okay, if you use these weapons, we're going to attack you with our conventional systems. And it'll be overwhelming. And then NATO will say, well, but then we're going to come in and attack you. So now the question is, who gets to attack who first? Now it comes down to preemption. The bottom line is the Russians are probably in a better position they'll achieve some sort of dominance in this conventional strike exchange, which now brings in American nuclear doctrine, which leads heavily towards nuclear preemption. In fact, we have a doctrine that talks about nuclear preemption, and we've made weapons for nuclear prevention. The primary weapon today for this, it's been said in the United States Congress, so I'm not giving away secrets here, is the Trident missile on board an Ohio-class submarine, which has been outfitted with a W-76-2 low-yield nuclear weapon. This is the weapon of choice for nuclear preemption, and we use it to control the escalation dynamic. That by using this low-yield weapon, we're sending a signal to the Russians that you can't prevail in any low yield or limited nuclear warfare, and that but we're giving you an opportunity to stop before we escalate. So there it is, the silver bullet, the W-76-2 on top of a Trident submarine. Okay, everybody's going, well, Scott, what's wrong with that? I mean, that's control. Okay, now let's go back to that warhead, the W-76-2. You know what that means, guys? Help you out here. That means that there's a W-76 version 1. And there are about 860 of them. And they're loaded on Trident missiles. Now, these are 100 kiloton weapons. They're older weapons. Their accuracy, because these are weapons that were made back in the 70s and the 80s, their accuracy isn't that good. So you have to, in order to destroy a missile silo in the ground, you're going to have to fire, it's a classified number, but we'll just make one up, 5. 5 warheads have to come in so you can get the probability of kill to take out this missile silo. But what we did, because remember, we're capped on the number of missiles or warheads we can have too by the New START treaties. But there's only so many of them, a finite number of them, and each one has to be put to a target. And as the adversary creates more targets, the Russians put more missiles in the ground, the Chinese are starting to put missiles in the ground. We're going, holy cow, we can't give 5-1 anymore. That creates a problem. How do we solve that problem? Well, we came up with a new fuse. We have a new fusing mechanism for the W-76-1, which now gives us a PK factor of 1-1, meaning that for every silo in the ground, we get to fire a W-76-1, and it will hit it, and that 100 megatons is going to collapse the silo, and we killed it. Well, that just freed us up, man, because now we got all these new 1-1 kills that we can put out there, and we're thinking, if we get into one of these crazy escalation things, we can preempt the Russians now because we have first strike preemption capability. We now can fire this and have enough left over to take out the Chinese weapons and still have the big W-88 bombs with 800 kilotons that could take out the cities. And all. Man, we just won the war, the nuclear war. We won it because we can preempt you. And the Russians are all sitting there going, oh, yeah, I guess you can. So we're going to have to come up with our own preemption. And they have done that. That's the Sarmat. That's the Yars mobile missile. That's the Poseidon submarine. All these new weapon systems are out there. But now the Russians today, as we speak, just so everybody gets really comfortable, Putin's meeting with his national security strategy team to talk about Russia's deterrence strategy and its new nuclear employment plan. Just what we're talking about right now. Right now, the Russians are saying we're going to preempt America. Guys, chew on it. It's real. The Russians now are saying you got a preemption policy backed by preemptive weapons. So we're going to have a preemption policy too. So now the Russians are going to be forward-leaning, looking at us. And they're very nervous. You know what they're nervous about? Those Trident missiles with the W-76-1s coming out on a low reduced trajectory that can hit these sites within minutes of being launched. So they're hyper-vigilant for Trident missile launches. Let's go back in time. Tell a war story from February 2020, back when Donald Trump was president. And he had a Secretary of Defense named Mark Espers. And little Mark Espers went to Omaha, Nebraska to participate in an exercise with Strategic Command. And they did an exercise because now the W-76-2 low-yield bomb had been put on Trident submarine missiles on the Ohio-class submarines. So they run a little war game. It involves the Baltics and the Russians. And NATO, Russia invaded. NATO kicked Russia's ass. And so Russia, put a tactical nuke into the Baltics. Escalate. And what did we do? We fired a Trident missile equipped with W-76-2s into Russia, saying, there, see, we managed this escalation. Did you hear what I just said? We fired a Trident missile. You think the Russians know what warhead we have on that missile? Are they going to say, oh, it's just a W-76-2. Don't worry about it. Forget our policy of nuclear preemption. We would never fire Trident missiles with W-76s against you preemptively, would we? Russians aren't going to believe that. So now, in any scenario, and we've exercised this scenario, people, it's not fake. Espers actually gave the launch order. We've exercised it. It's hardwired in. If we decide to escalate using W-76-2s, we're going to use a Trident missile to deliver it. And the Russians now, thanks to the Putin meeting, will say, we assume that the preparation to launch a Trident missile against a Russian target with a nuclear warhead is a preemptive strike. We fire all our missiles, get them out of the ground. Because that's the whole idea. To defeat preemption, you use the resources that are being targeted. You don't keep them in the ground to get hit. You use them. And so Russia will go full forward with its own preemptive strike to take out America, and we're all dead. Do you see the stupidity of where we're at today? This is a one-way ticket on a highway to hell. And no American is thinking about this. We're thinking about everything but this. Even the people, and God bless the people that are worried about Gaza. Really, I'm with you. God bless the people worried about Lebanon. I'm with you. I met a wonderful Lebanese family in New York City back in June. They flew out there I was supposed to have an anti-war rally in Central Park. It got canceled because it's impossible to organize in Central Park anymore. They're not demonstration friendly. But I met with, sort of the consolation prizes. I went to New York City and had lunch with this family. Wonderful people. They're in Beirut right now. Scared to death. I'm worried about them. Guys, my heart is with Gaza. My heart is but I can't do anything about them if we die in a nuclear war. And we are so front-loaded for a nuclear war right now. This has to be the number one issue of our time. Because if we ignore this, and I'm telling you right now, everything I just told you, 99.9999% of the people in your audience had no clue that it was there. None. Because they're not focused on it. They're not worried about nuclear war. They don't think it's real. They don't think it's going to happen. And if they did, they're going to be told by the government the Russians are bluffing. Don't worry about it. We got this under control. We don't have anything under control. We don't have anything under control. This is as out of control as it gets. We have an election coming up where we get to vote. And what I'm telling people is vote for the person that is articulating the best possible route to avoid a nuclear war with Russia. Don't give your vote away to anybody right now. Don't say, I'm giving it to Trump, I'm giving it to Harris, I'm giving it to Stein. Don't say that, because the second you say that, you don't count. You just negated yourself as being a voice between now and November 5th. Why? You gave away your vote. Why do they care about you anymore? I don't care about you. You're irrelevant. You already told me you're voting for it. The political grease goes on the squeaky wheel. Our job between now and November 5th is to become the squeaky wheel. I want this wheel to squeak so loud, and I want this wheel to be about stopping a nuclear war. Squeak, squeak, squeak. And now the political grease gets slapped on. Political grease is our candidates saying how they're going to stop the wheel from squeaking. How do they mollify me? How do they prevent me from making this an issue? Convince me you're not going to go to war. People kept saying, Scott, you're Don Quixote, tilting at windmills, maybe. You're chasing unicorns. You're never going to happen. Screw you. First of all, screw you. Because this is life and death. So I don't play those kind of frickin' games. This is as real as it gets. And you think I'm a goddamn amateur? Excuse my language. I don't want to get you kicked off or anything, but I'm getting a little mad here. You guys think I fake this shit? Did I make this up? No. I've done this before. I know what I'm talking about. Let me tell you a little story. There was an op-ed written in The Hill last week by Robert Kennedy Jr. and Donald Trump Jr. Do you think that happened by accident? Do you think it just happened? No, processes were initiated that resulted in that happening. Processes that are related to what we're talking about here, me and the rally that's taking place. We've already had a success because one campaign has committed to a narrative. Is it the perfect disarmament narrative? No. Is it the perfect prevent nuclear war narrative? No, but it's there on the table. The squeaky wheel got the political grease. Now, what are you going to do to help me to get the Harris campaign to commit, to get Jill Stein to commit? What happens if we get all of them to say this is an issue now? We have debate, dialogue, discussion, exactly the things we need in a democracy to inform the public and make the public hold their potential elected representatives accountable for what they do in their name. Guys, this is not a hopeless cause. This is not tilting windmills. This is not chasing unicorns. This is saving your damn lives. This is about making life livable. It's about having a future. This is as real as it gets. I'm committed to it. We're having a rally in Kingston on 28 September. Roger Waters is going to, he has agreed to, he's going to come on and speak for a while and then going to play some music. I think Two Suns in the Sunset, his classic song about nuclear war, is going to be one of the songs. But then we there's issues out there. We're not ignoring the issues. Max Blumenthal and his wonderful wife Anya Parampel are going to come in and talk about the Middle East and the Gaza situation, and now Hezbollah. Judge Andrew Napolitano is going to talk about the assault on free speech. Gerald Celente is going to talk about democracy and the peace movement, and I'm going to get up there and talk about preventing a nuclear war, what I call Operation Dawn. Operation Dawn is just 4 simple questions asked to the American public. What are you going to do to save democracy? What are you going to do to save America? What are you going to do to save the world? How are you going to use your vote in November? That's 4. I'm a Marine. 4 fingers. I guess I was counting my thumb. But Operation Dawn. And it begins on September 20. Now, like any military guy, I've done a little bit of reconnaissance beforehand, a little bit of preparation of the battlefield, and we got an op-ed piece published in The Hill. Again, that's an accomplishment that I don't think that people understand. We got a major campaign to commit in writing to how it wants to stop a nuclear war and stop the conflict in Ukraine. That's a big deal. We're going to start the major operation on the 28th, and it continues through November 5th. It won't stop. And I'm inviting everybody to be part of this. If you can't attend physically, and we'd like to shut Kingston down to make a statement. Hell, if we shut down the Thruway, that would be an even better statement. If we shut down New York State, that would be awesome, but we're not going to. We're shutting down downtown Kingston. But if you can't make it, I don't expect you to fly in from California. We're going to be streaming it live. Danny, I guess I have to talk to you. Or I don't know if we're going to, if you want to put it on your platform, but we're going to have it on a whole bunch of platforms, streaming it live. It's from 2 o'clock till 6 o'clock. You're not going to get discussions like this anywhere else. And then, it'll be there. We're going to chop it up and continue to plug it into the system. And we're going to continue with follow-on functions until November. Become a part of this. And it's not because I want you to do me a favor. Screw me. Do yourself a favor. Do you want to live? I don't know how to make it clear to you. You almost died on the 14th of September. You almost died because somebody didn't give a damn about you. That somebody was Joe Biden. He was getting ready to sign a piece of paper that would have set in motion events that had the high probability of leading to a general nuclear exchange between the United States and Russia. Well, I wasn't briefed on that. No, none of us were. Did you vote on it? Did you say that's what you want? No, our nuclear policy is on full automatic. It's time to bring that to an end. It's time for we, the people, to assert the one thing the Constitution gives us, which is the ability to pick our elected officials. Let's make this vote count. And defend free speech in the meantime, because again, to make this vote count, I have to be allowed to do what I'm doing. The FBI raided my house. They don't want me doing this. They're afraid of this. The Department of Justice damn sure doesn't want me doing this. They don't want anybody doing this. That's why Judge Andrew Napolitano, they're going to be talking about the danger of the assault on free speech and the imperative of having free speech and exercising this right of free speech. We have to hold our government accountable for what it does in our name. That means that we have to start asking uncomfortable questions about nuclear war. Is this really the outcome we want? Do we really have people in power that know what they want? Did you guys vote for something called the interagency? It wasn't on any ballot I won, but the last time I had a conversation with a senior official from the Biden administration, I was told, and others were told, that even though Biden wanted to go back to sole purpose doctrine, meaning the only purpose of America's nuclear arsenal is to deter against nuclear attack. Okay, still have nuclear weapons, but you're only going to use them if we're attacked with nuclear weapons first, right? Yes, that's sole purpose doctrine. Biden didn't do it. We continued the Trump era policy of nuclear preemption. Leaning forward as a former deputy undersecretary of defense, assistant secretary of defense under Trump said, the goal of the Trump administration was to have the Russians and the Chinese wake up every morning not knowing whether or not this was the day America was going to nuke them. Do you guys understand how stupid that is? If someone came to you and said the goal of Russia is to make us all wake up, all Americans wake up today not knowing whether Russia is going to nuke us, we'd say that's insane. That's unacceptable. Well, that was the policy, and that's the policy of the Biden administration today. Did you vote for it? You know who vetoed him trying to go to sole purpose? The interagency. The interagency. What does that mean? The establishment. Did you vote for them? Did you feel that your voice is being heard here? Or have we, the people, allowed ourselves to be excised from this process, so much so that we have an unelected blob in Washington, D.C. making life and death decisions on our behalf? I call BS on that one. I'm not willing to let that happen. And I hope you're not willing to let it either. So come Kingston on the 28th of September and become part of Operation Dawn. Join me in this crusade to make a better future by stopping a nuclear war.
Yes, indeed. And here are the details again. Saturday, September 28th, starting at 2 p.m. There you can see the address. Hopefully you can see it on your screen as big as it can be, in Kingston, New York. So you can head there in person. And then there will, of course, be lots of places where you can catch the live stream of this event if you're unable to make it in person. Scott, I think we can end here. Everyone, make sure you go and save the date for that event. And also go to scottritter.com where you can also find those details. That link is in the video description. Just a few announcements before we go. And I'm thankful that I got the dates so horribly wrong, so we can not only correct the dates, but also now there is no conflict. So the next day, if you are in New York City, you can celebrate China's 75th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. There will be a couple of people from the consulate coming to give some words to friends who are celebrating this event. I will be speaking there. It'll be at the Malcolm and Betty Shabazz Center in New York City. And we will be talking about, there will be many opportunities to also carry on this discussion of nuclear war, because Russia is the big target when it comes to provoking this. But of course, as we've spoken about, Scott, and as I've spoken about many times on this channel, it is also a risk that is even beyond just Russia, because you have the United States, certain factions of the establishment talking about a multi-front war, all of which could lead to a nuclear escalation and build up as well. So you can find that link in the video description. Lastly, and I know you might have some closing words on this, Scott, there is a wave of censorship occurring. We've had multiple channels, African Stream, Mark Sloboda, DD Geopolitics, even in just the last week. Scott has experienced this. His YouTube channel was taken down, about almost a year ago now. This channel is not immune. So please do, the Rumble community, I am starting to move over there to a significant degree. I don't want you to stop watching here necessarily, but go to rumble.com, go to my channel. Be sure you are following me there as well, because it is critical. I'm going to pull it out, critical that we ensure that when things do go down, as they have, that people who are following this channel can migrate over there. So we are actually streaming over there right now. So hello, Rumble community. I'll be working with them further, because these platforms need to continue. And surely, as we've seen with so many friends of ours, including Scott here, it could happen at any moment. So with all that said, not only go to rumble.com and follow me, you can also follow Scott Ritter, all of Scott Ritter's work on his website. And there are also other ways to support this channel, including paid memberships on Patreon and Substack. Scott, any final words before we head out of here today?
I'd just like to emphasize what you said about Rumble. Look, when we got taken down from YouTube, it was a huge blow. I'm not going to get into anybody's business, but none of what you do happens for free. There's overhead. You have to earn a living. You're putting all this time and effort. And YouTube offered a viable business model for the alternative media practitioner. I can say that when they took me down, it carved out $60,000 to $80,000 of income, annual income. Exactly. Devastating.
It is.
And we've never fully recovered, because Rumble hasn't reached the monetization level of YouTube. One of the reasons why is that everybody's flocked to YouTube. I mean, YouTube is this giant platform. But for free speech, YouTube is the antithesis of free speech. It is heavily censored, impossible to survive on YouTube. Rumble is a great platform for free speech. Free speech is just that, free speech. You're going to find things on Rumble that you're not going to agree with. Don't watch it. But, Danny has done the right thing in setting up a Rumble account. And I would encourage, Rumble becomes more viable the more people who sign up to Rumble, and you help Danny out. You help all alternative media practitioners, all these alternative journalists out who use Rumble, who need to, in order to survive, be able to get the message out. And Rumble is a very effective platform for doing that can become even more effective the more people who participate. So as Danny said, keep watching YouTube. That's your business, but maybe start watching Rumble, because it's a better platform for the sanctity and the purity and the preservation of free speech.
Right. And I always say, for those who still have, thank goodness, still have a YouTube. I mean, this is how I'm talking about it now. Still here. Of course, you continue to watch it, but you can also just leave it open and actually just watch Rumble to ensure that you're just watching. We live in the tech age, the information age. So there are many ways to do many things at the same time. But surely go subscribe on Rumble. I know, Scott, you go to scottritter.com. You can find the Rumble channel for your show there, because YouTube is coming down hard. All of the establishment media arms that we have access to now are coming down pretty hard, and it seems like every time there's escalations, whether it's West Asia, Lebanon, Palestine, Ukraine, and now elections, it seems to get worse and worse. So all of that is to say is, do support independent media. Make sure you're going to Scott's website, finding all the ways you can support him there. Make sure you're going to the video description and supporting however you can long term, because that is the kind of support that's needed to continue to do this work. But Scott, I think we can head out of here. I'm just going to give a quick thank you to everyone who gave super chats. We couldn't get to the questions today. Thank you for being a member as well, Joseph. Thank you for being a member, Floodland. That was an interesting question, but one that we'll have to get to another time. This is also an interesting question, but we will have to get to another time. Thank you so much for the super chat. Renee, thanks for being a member, becoming a member. Tates, thanks for this interesting comment. Strive for Balance, thank you so much for this. And then Samal Parla, thanks so much for your contribution. All right, everyone, we are out of here. Thank you so much, Scott. We will head out of here together. Take good care, and we'll be back again soon. Make sure, 28th, 29th, busy weekend. Go to the Peace and Freedom Rally. Watch it if you can't go. And then, of course, the next day you can come as well to New York for the celebration of the 75th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. All right. Take care.